Hello all and welcome to my presentation on advanced concepts in circuit simulation and compact modeling. Hi, this is Dhaval Mahajan and today I will attempt to explain to you some intricacies of how a circuit is simulated and how a compact model forms an integral part of the process. I hope that this presentation will be very useful to fresh graduates in the field of electronics or electrical engineering, or even those who are pursuing higher degree in the field of microelectronics and semiconductor device physics in general. So I would like to start with this word simulation that you must have encountered a lot of times, and which is a word which has now permeated through all the branches of knowledge, including basic sciences, engineering. You talk about any field and you will see people talk about simulation. Now, what is it about? So here I give you an etymological definition of the word simulate. What it means essentially is to imitate, copy or represent some real world scenario preferably. And why do you want to represent, or why do you want to copy that real world scenario? So that you can either model the phenomenon, or you can imitate those conditions for the purpose of study or training. Now, we want to have an experiment or product, or any practical world application designed in such a manner that we succeed in the first pass. Now, how do we come up with a solution? We basically imagine in our minds. So, for example, Thomas Edison, it is said that he did some thousand iterations to come up with a simple light bulb. Essentially, what he did was to imagine in his mind different scenarios and different ways of creating that apparatus, so that when you pass a current through the coil, it shall illuminate. Now, imagine what? Again, I just explained what it means. What you do is you imagine various possible combinations of apparatus or basically available resources. And what does imagination require as a prerequisite? It requires a model. And we'll see with this simile that even a circuit simulator requires a model. And in case of circuit simulators, those models are called as compact models. So, suffice to say that an act of simulation requires two components: a simulator, that is a piece of code, or in our simile, a mind, etc., that imagines, and a model that helps in the act of simulation. So, in this discussion, we have come up with two words: one is simulator and one is a model. And know that both of these two components form the act of simulation as a whole. Now, the next question that can easily come to anyone's mind is that, am I aware of some examples of simulation which are so much imbibed in our everyday life that we don't even realize that that is indeed an example of simulation? So, for example, weather forecasting. Here is a map of Australia showing the different temperature zones, and all of these predictions basically requires perhaps a use of supercomputer, or lots of computing resources, and it does require a simulation, a full scale simulation using the various models of uh, weather. And it is believed that it is indeed a very difficult task, and again, not a very nobody can say with 100% accuracy that okay, this my simulation is 100% correct. And so, but however, you see weather forecasting being done every day in the news, but you don't realize that it is an excellent example of simulation. Next, 4D ultrasound. Nowadays, parents or to be parents are, they are so much pampered, and there used to be a time that you only had some two-dimensional figure of the, to be born baby. But now using computer algorithms, which actually uses the a model of human face, and recreates three-dimensional or four-dimensional quote unquote images of the baby from actual two-dimensional ultrasound image. So you know that ultrasound basically just sends in some waves and detects the reflected waves, and that detection is a two-dimensional process. However, this kind of image is basically an extension of the two dimension into three dimensions, essentially using computer simulation and the model of a human face. And of course, Call of Duty. I can just never forget this sniper mission. It is so difficult to cross from the start to end. There are, snipers sitting here and there, and they just shoot you like hell. However, this Call of Duty or all these advanced video games that you see right now, military based or non-military based or strategy based, they are actually a form of extensive simulation, either a war simulation or a strategy testing simulation. And of course, these kind of advanced video games, they do require a model. They do. That's why you might have heard phrases like, okay, this game actually models the physics. So the physics, for example, a sniper gun, the physics of how the bullet is going to get ejected and then hit the target, and with what muzzle velocity on and all that. So all those formulae, if you implement while this game is being played, then essentially that's a physics-based game, essentially. So these are some three practical examples that you might be aware of that I found to be very interesting for you to process. And now I will try to move on to my next slide. Okay, so before I in fact now explain how a circuit is simulated, I would like to first revisit the concept of a circuit. Okay, and the concept of a circuit involves defining nodes and what I call the process of node abstraction. Now, figure 1 shows the cross section of a typical silicon on insulator MOSFET with N plus source, N plus drain, the gate, and this here I have not shown here silicon dioxide, and there will be obviously there will be some spacers of high K materials and so on and so forth. However, I haven't shown that much complexity. Then between any two devices on the wafer, there will be a shallow trench isolation, which will essentially act as an insulation between two devices. And there is a buried oxide layer, and then there is a back wafer. All right. Now let's take path number one, which is purple in color. I hope you are able to see it. And if I just trace the path, okay, and basically apply the Maxwell's equation for the electric field, which which says that the curl of the electric field is equal to the rate of change of magnetic field. Now, if the magnetic field perpendicular to this area is zero, then essentially it means that the curl of electric field is zero, and the curl of electric field being zero means that if I travel this closed path, okay, then the closed line integral of E dot dl, or dot product of the electric field with the dl, the length vectors, will be zero. And if you actually expand it, what you get is, the first of all, the ex, the you will need the concept of a node, because let's say you expand it over the segment, let's say from S to B, then S and B are basically nodes. Similarly, the segment B to D, this segment, so in which this, the start and end points, the B and D will be then the nodes. Similarly, D to G, G to S, and so on and so forth. So in this path, you can identify 1, 2, 3, and 4, 4 nodes. Now, between any two nodes, okay, and remember that these nodes, when I say S is a node, this entire region S is a node. Now you might ask, hold on, even if it's a n plus dope, let's say source, region, won't that thing have its own resistance? And then if it has got a resistance, then that will mean that there will be a voltage drop. And then so you cannot say that there is only one S node. You have to define, let's say, two nodes or three nodes and four nodes. However, what we say is that this entire path, and you can take any path in this n plus region, any path, the the E dot dl, or the voltage drop across that path, will be so negligible that you can actually consider this entire region as an equipotential region. And that's the way a node is abstracted. You say that the entire region is equipotential, and hence it can be approximated as a node. Similar thing goes for the B, similar thing for no goes for the D drain node and the gate node. Now, uh, this is the concept of a node. Now there can be one two node element, visually the resistance, the, the capacitance or inductance, that is R, C or L, which can be connected in between any of the two nodes. And how do you and how much combinations can there exist? Basically 4C2, that is 6 combinations of these nodes are basically allowed. So basically there can be an R. What it means is that there can be a R, C or L element in between G or S, S or B, B or D, and G or B, S or D. So total 6 combinations, right? Uh, so this is how, now when I am saying, now when I put basically the nodes and then connect them using these R, C, L elements, then essentially now what I get is a circuit. So essentially in this slide what I have given you is the process of arriving at the definition of a circuit. Now similarly you can take path 2, in which you will be able to identify, if you take this path 2, you will be able to identify similarly two nodes, the S node and the X node, which is the back wafer X node. If you see this stray path, what you will see that if you actually add on E dot dl along this path, again it will be a very negligible kind of portion of the total electric field, and that's why you won't have any node here, or let's say a node in the air, basically, because you don't need it. And why you don't need it is because the E dot dl is again negligible. So now now from all of this discussion, how many nodes are there in the above MOSFET, which is a silicon on insulator MOSFET? In this scenario, you have basically 5 nodes: one drain, source, the gate, the bulk, and the back wafer X. Hence, you can say MOSFET is a five-terminal device if you consider the back wafer as a node. However, in the textbooks, you will find that they will say MOSFET is a four-terminal device, which is also a good enough definition. However, in the practical process design kits, wherein you will see compact models, it will generally be a five-terminal sub-circuit model. Why? Because this capacitance between, let's say, this buried oxide, if we, let's say it is very thin, then the capacitive coupling between the bulk and the back wafer, or the source and the back wafer, or drain and the back wafer, or even the substrate losses, which will be the capacitance of the buried oxide and the resistance of this back wafer, can actually be important, and they might be modeled in your process design kit. And that is the reason you should always think about a MOSFET as a five terminal device for many of the practical applications. And also, if you are a circuit designer, IC circuit designer, then also you should basically remember that you should always think of MOSFET as being a five terminal device, fifth being the wafer or the back wafer terminal. Now this slide, I actually explained the Maxwell's equation, closed line integral E dot TL equals 0, and then from that how you can divide it into, let's say, n number of segments, and this is essentially the derivation of the Kirchhoff's voltage law. And when expanded, it basically gives the drops between segments, as you can see here, G to S, S to B, B to D, D to G, with the starting and end point of segment basically being a node. And then if uh, if if voltage across any segment is then divided further into its subparts, then doing so for all the segments will yield us basically infinite nodes in a circuit. However, we don't want it, so a circuit is an engineering model in the sense that we don't actually divide the nodes further and further and make it into infinite nodes, because then solving for such circuits analytically will be then a Herculean task. And that's why we basically again say that, okay, this S n plus source will be a node, D plus drain will be a node, this B will be a node, the gate, which is a polysilicon dope with n plus in this case, will be a node, and so on and so forth. And so which also brings me to the final point of this slide, that is a region where voltage across any segment in that region, you can draw any segment in that region. For example, the drain, you can draw like this, you can draw like this, any segment. If I can say that voltage is 0 or very close to 0, then that entire region can be considered as a single node. That is, a node is an abstracted equipotential region. And I think I have made this point very clear in the previous slide itself. However, this slide itself, is driving that point further into your minds. So in this slide, I will basically define the problem of solving a circuit. And in doing so, first of all, we need to understand that we will like to have a definite hierarchy, because then what you can do that, based on a certain capability, you can develop furthermore some advanced capabilities on top of it. And this approach is very, very engineering in nature, because any problem of engineering you will see will be defined in such a manner so that it leads to a hierarchy. And that, I believe, as an engineer, is the best way to define a problem, because that simplifies your development process, number one. And number two, any debugging that you have to do as you go up higher basically needs to come from from the bottom, which means that, let's say, I implement a new algorithm for AC simulation, and I'm not getting good results, then most probably you will have to dig down to the to the to the DC simulation. Why? Because DC simulation, as I'm showing here, is the bottom of this hierarchy. Now this DC solution is also called as a kind of a continuous steady state solution of the circuit, and we will see later that all the circuit simulators basically solve KCL iteratively in order to arrive at the DC solution. Now, why is that so? Why not KVL? Why KCL? I will explain this in the next slide. Now, based on the capability to do a DC simulation, transient simulation can be defined. And let me put it in very simple words. I can actually solve DC for all the time steps starting from t equal to 0 and then through some t step till t equal to t stop with total instantaneous values of nodal voltages. As we know, nodal voltages are the independent variables in the KCL. I will be formulating all the equations of the circuit in terms of nodal voltages related to each other by impedances. And so uh, I can actually define transient simulation like this, wherein the total instantaneous value equals DC plus the signal, and the signal can be small or large signal. Now, what what do you think that doing this, that is solving DC at all time steps, what will happen to the simulation? Well, the simulation will be taking so much time or so much resources that you will never be able to simulate transient simulations for practically designed circuits. And that's why practically you don't do the DC for all the time steps. What you actually do is that you convert the differential equations into difference equations and then use the established methods like Euler's method or trapezoidal method to solve for the predicted solution in the next step. So basically at t equal to 0 you take the DC simulation and then you assume that the solution will be in certain manner, let's say quadratic or linear, and then for each t step use the Euler's backward or forward method or Gear method in order to arrive at the solution. So practically this is how transient simulation is done. Now based on this transient simulation you can also formulate AC, harmonic balance, and so on, all sorts of periodic steady state and all sorts of higher forms of simulation. And what basically all of these simulations do, they solve the small signal DC, sorry, they solve the yeah, basically they solve the small signal over the DC for all the frequencies from 0 to f equal to f stop and via the stepping frequency of f step. Now what this means is that you linearize the circuit. When I'm saying that you solve for small signal, you basically linearize the circuit around the operating point and then apply the small signal in the input, find out what output it gives, and then basically the gain and everything will be output divided by input, and that for each frequency if you plot you will get AC simulation output. Harmonic balance is not as simple as AC, and I don't think so that explaining harmonic balance through this kind of method will help. I will like you to YouTube, search on YouTube. There are lots of very good videos on harmonic balance and how basically it involves partitioning a circuit into uh, for for the non-linear and linear response, and then do some complex mathematics. But however, I'm not interested in elaborating the harmonic balance any further. So in this slide, I will explain how the DC simulation is done. Why? Because DC simulation, as we saw in the previous slide, forms a very fundamental, fundamental. It is very fundamental to the concept of circuit simulation. Now, in order to illustrate how DC simulation is done, I would like you to see figure 2, wherein I am having a simple three-terminal MOSFET device with drain, gate and source attached to a drain voltage via resistance RD, drawing a current ID, and the input gate bias VGS establishes the operating point. Now, if I say source is the reference node and the voltage drop being positive and voltage rise as negative, then if I apply KVL to the three loops, you will get equations 1, 2 and 3. However, this minus Vg plus Vgs equal to 0, which was this loop, okay, this loop, uh, there is absolutely no information that is gained by this equation. And you must have noticed what I am now pointing out to, that let's say when you are solving some undergrad problem in circuits involving MOSFETs, you will never refer to equation 2, or you will never put this equation 2 at all. Why? Because there is absolutely no information that is gained. However, equations 1 and 3 do provide a lot of information, and let's say if Vd is known and Vg is known, then basically you can almost solve the entire circuit by assuming certain operating point conditions. So ultimately, finding all the paths, however, okay, this point number 2, before that, uh, this is a very simple circuit having three loops. However, for a very complex circuit, there can be hundreds of loops, and then finding all those paths or those loops will require, in that scenario, a simulator to have a very complex algorithms and perhaps artificial intelligence. However, we know that many circuit simulators like SPICE, which stands for Simulation Program with uh, Integrated Circuit Emphasis, and so many such simulators which came in the 80s, they don't use AI, and there is a reason for it, because finding the redundant paths, if you want to use KVL, then finding all those redundant paths will require the complexity of your algorithms to increase exponentially, and hence KCL is used. Why? Because let's say if you have four nodes in a circuit, then we have exactly four KCL equations. Unlike KVL, depending upon the complexity of the circuit, you can have, you know, a very large number of loops or very small number of loops. So basically, n number of nodes will give you n equations, and then these equations can be solved iteratively in a computer program using, let's say, Newton-Raphson kind of technique. Now, why are we going to use numerical techniques? Simply because a computer system cannot solve anything analytically. It can only solve equations numerically, and that is the reason we need to use numerical techniques such as Newton-Raphson. And what are the kind of equations basically now we'll solve? Now we know that we are going to solve KCL for the obvious reasons that we explained earlier. We are basically use some f of v equals 0. We are going to solve equations of the form f of v equals 0 for the n number of nodes. So figure 3 shows a Newton-Raphson iteration method being employed uh, to solve the KCL for any circuit. Now y-axis is f of v in general and v is the voltage axis. Now what, according to Newton-Raphson method, what you essentially do is that if your solution is the the black you know the black line, you can the black curve, sorry, then you basically assume a solution which will be let's say v superscript 0. What it means is that v superscript 0 is a collection of voltages of all the n nodes in the zeroth iteration, okay, and then f of v0 will be the corresponding f of v in general represented here, this point. So if this is your initial assumption, what you do is you find out the slope of the f of v, and then wherever the tangent meets the x-axis, that becomes your new solution. Now, how do you say that this is the new solution? You say that this is the new solution if uh, if the equations a and b are not satisfied, which means that if equations a and b, which are basically checking the residue of voltages and f of v's, which is basically current. So your equation a is checking the residue of the voltage and equation b is checking the residue of the current. So essentially if they are satisfied, then what will happen, you will basically the circuit simulation will say that yeah, you have reached a solution. And now how basically is that going to work? The way it is going to work is that you see here I am defining a box of stable solution, wherein this x-axis is the Vn equation A, that is Vn tall plus some delta, right, is the x-axis, and the y-axis length of the box is basically abs tall plus some delta, which is this delta and this delta are basically different. That can be inferred here, right? Now uh, what I mean to say here is that if the next solution falls within this box of the stable solution, let's say if this curve is very steep and if I draw a tangent and I reach, let's say, here, and now you can see that I am reaching inside the box, then according to the Newton-Raphson criteria, we'll say that we have reached the solution. Now, why do I say so? Why this less than criteria is there? Why cannot I say, let's say, why can't I, let's say, check exact solution, which is, let's say, f of p equal to exact 0? Now, the reason why you cannot do so is because, let's say, if you have a 64-bit computer, then in order to represent 0 in that system, you will have to make all the 64 bits equal to 0. Now, if I allow to do so, that is, instead of this less than some, if I instead of, let's say, checking these residues, if I intend on checking exact, the f of v equals 0 in this Newton-Raphson method, then theoretically I will basically require almost infinite number of iterations, or and practically perhaps, let's say, tens of thousands or 20,000s or 40,000s of iterations. Now basically what it means that if I want to make each and every bit 0 to check for f of v equal to 0, then I will require those many number of iterations, that is infinite, theoretically infinite number of iterations. However, we don't want to do that. At the max 150, 200, 300 iterations, I should be able to get the solution. If this curve is well behaved, that is f of v is well behaved and not doing some some funny stuff, then perhaps even 5 to 10 iterations are actually sufficient practically to get to the solution. And this is the reason you use this less than tolerance, less than some tolerance criteria, that is equations A and B, because we actually cannot represent zero on a computer system uh, until and unless we are willing to go for infinite number of iterations in a numerical process. Uh, so this explains how the DC simulation is done. Uh, in practical circuit simulators, you will also see some G-min, C-min parameters. What they do essentially is that if in any iteration, if you aren't reaching a stable solution that is inside the box, then what the Gmin or Cmin does is that it introduces some extra very high impedance path from that node, or rather all the nodes, to the ground, so that the what it does is basically it shifts the f of v. Now what it is doing is it is adding some extra f of v, and that extra f of v, what it is going to do is it is going to nudge, or it is going to increase the local slope, you know, uh, when you have already arrived close to f of v equal to 0, when in your Newton-Raphson method you have already arrived very close to f of v equal to 0, what this Gmin and Cmin is going to do, it is going to nudge the curve uh, upwards, or increase the slope upwards, so that the next tangent basically falls inside the box of stable solution. And this is a very practical and very important tool, that is usage of Gmin or Cmin, uh, if 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 you are getting convergence errors in your DC solution. And so if, let's say, if you are simulating a circuit and you are getting lots of convergence issues, the first thing that you can do is to increase the value of Gmin, and if that doesn't work, then perhaps introduce Cmin, and try to see whether in most of the cases I believe Gmin and Cmin, they work very fine. So in this slide, I've explained to you how DC simulation is done using a numerical technique like Newton-Raphson, and also how to practically use certain parameters such as Gmin, Cmin in order to solve your convergence issues. Now, till this time, I explained to you how a circuit simulator simulates a given circuit. However, I didn't explain to you that how now you have so many elements. Let's say if there are two nodes, then obviously it can accommodate either a resistance or a capacitance or an inductance in between them. If you have three nodes, then obviously it means that it's not a passive device anymore. It's an active device, such as transistor, MOSFETs, HEMS, etc. So in such a case, what that active device is going to offer is basically a transconductance or trans resistance, and then the input resistance and the output resistance, and so on and so forth. And all of those components, that is the input resistance, output resistance, the transconductance of that active device, or and even the and even the impedances of a passive device, they are represented in a circuit simulation via a model. Okay, and especially in case of circuit simulations, they are called as compact models, because simple simply because whatever the formulation for that model, that needs to be compact. If it is too much, then again the model will take a very long time in order to process and give out the values of impedances, various impedances. And that is the reason these models are called as compact models. And another point to note is that a compact model is basically a black box for a circuit simulator. And the way any circuit simulator like SPICE or Spectre interacts with that compact model is that in any iteration, let's say a Newton-Raphson iteration, the simulator gives out estimates of the nodal voltages to the compact model, and via the evaluation of various transconductances and resistances, input output resistances, the compact model gives out the information about the nodal currents, or instead of nodal currents, basically are the branch currents. The branch currents and the nodal charges. It gives out the information about this. And we know that the derivative of charge with respect to bias is the capacitance. So when I am saying compact model gives you charges, it basically gives the various capacitances. And this is how basically a circuit simulation is done, and this is how, in fact, this is how the partition of the problem of circuit simulation has been done. That is, a circuit simulator won't know what a compact model is doing, and a compact model will basically definitely will have access to everything that a circuit simulator defines, including the temperature and everything, so that it can process that information and evaluate preferably based on the physics of the device involved. So if the compact model uses the physics, then it's called a physics-based compact model. So BSIM, PSP, etc. are examples of such modeling approaches. And preferably circuit designers, as a circuit designer, you should basically definitely you should prefer physics-based models, simply because they are scalable, number one. That is, if you change the geometry of the device, they will predict correct behavior. And number two, they are more reliable. Why? Because the underlying physics, the semiconductor physics, or say a superconducting physics, if it's a superconducting device, then that has essentially already been taken into account if you have a physics-based model. So this completes my discussion on the nature of interaction between a simulator and a model. So in the next two slides, I will be concluding my presentation, and I would like to first of all start with a non-quasi-static model. A non-quasi-static model is a model that actually models the real life situation. And what is the real life situation? So consider figure 5, wherein I have drawn source, drain, the polysilicon gate and the gate oxide and the bulk terminal. So it's a bulk process MOSFET. And let's say, and here this triangular thing, it's basically it's basically the inversion layer of the device. And let's say at t equal to 0, an electron passes the forward bias source to bulk junction and gets injected into the channel. And the bias is such that there is a pinch off here, so that there is a depletion electric field being present here. And let's see what happens now. The electron travels towards the source, from source to the drain terminal, and enters the depletion region here, because there is a pinch off I have shown here. And then what it does is that it creates an electron hole pair because of the impact ionization, and the electron, let's say the electron that has been generated, it has a very high energy because of this collision process and acceleration due to the depletion electric field in this drain side depletion electric field. And so it can either get caught by the drain terminal voltage, and which will basically lead to the drain current, or it can also get caught by the oxide, gate oxide, which will basically then lead to the deterioration of the device, and it has got lots of ramifications on the device reliability. And this process of electron injection into gate is basically called as hot carrier injection, and that is a very big branch of reliability, wherein you try to minimize this by some clever design of the device. And now the hole that was formed can go to the substrate, thus forming the substrate current. Now, even when I described all of this in the language, I had to describe it one by one. That is, electron leaving here, then reaching the drain depletion electric field, then crossing the depletion electric field, then reaching the VDD, basically, right? Now, this sequential, if my more compact model simulates this entire process, then it is called as non-quasi-static model, which means that it is not assuming anything. It is simulating all the transient that is going to happen when the electron is traveling from source to drain. And indeed, this is a real life situation. And so, in this case, the drain current and the substrate current at t equal to 0 should be 0. So, if your compact model simulates 0 drain and substrate current at t equal to 0, then you can say that it's a non-quasi-static model. And this kind of modeling is difficult. Why? Simply because you need to model this region as a RC distributed line or a transmission line. Ideally, it should be modeled as a transmission line. However, you can also practically model using lumped elements like RC distributed elements. However, what this will do, this will, for devices having very short channel lengths, this delay, this transit time, which is also called as transit time, won't actually matter because the device length is actually very small already. In fact, if you go on squeezing this length, a time will come wherein the electron will be directly emitted from the source and will enter the depletion electric field of the drain, and it will get just sucked into the drain terminal. However, this is never done practically because that condition is the punch through condition which is never done. However, for let's say the length of 45 nanometer or 22 nanometer gate lengths, the transit time is so small that you can actually neglect the non-quasi-static effects for short channel transistors. However, for long channel transistors, definitely the non-quasi-static effects play a major role, and they can introduce errors in some of the well-designed high frequency or analog circuits. So figure 6 shows the same device that I explained earlier, and now just look at the animation. You know, what it is saying is that starting from t equal to 0, I am having some drain current, I am having some substrate current, although practically it won't ever happen. So what I am saying is that I am allowing this transient, that is this transit time, to pass, and starting from t equal to 0, I will say that the electron has already reached, the electron that was emitted from the source has already reached the drain and has already started to contribute to the drain current and the substrate current. In such a, if I model the MOSFET in such a manner, then it's called as a quasi-static model. Why? Because quasi means kind of semi, static means steady state. So semi-steady state. What quasi-static means is that it is a semi-steady state model, which means that, okay, I am saying that, okay, this transient has passed at starting from t equal to 0 and everything is now behaving normal. That is, the drain current is there, the substrate current is there, source current was already there from starting from t equal to 0. Now this is a pretty good approximation as long as the time scale of concern exceeds the intrinsic transit time. And when will that happen? That will happen for either very short channel devices. Why? Because the transit time is very, very small for such devices. So this completes the definition of a quasi-static and non-quasi-static compact model. In fact, as we are progressing towards highly scaled technologies wherein the frequencies, the FT and Fmax are so high, uh, even the short channel devices might also experience some non-quasi-static effects. And hence, non-quasi-static modeling might again be a very important topic in compact modeling for circuit designs, especially for, let's say, 5G networks, which for which the center frequency is going to be around 28 gigahertz. And I believe that non-quasi-static modeling will be a very, very important part of designing the circuits for 5G networks. 4G networks, the center frequency here is around 2 gigahertz, and that for that I believe the quasi-static models are well well behaved, and I think people have used quasi-static models to design the 4G communication networks. However, starting from 5G, I believe you should definitely see a lot of you know good teams like Berkeley's BSIM team or PSP team, working on non-quasi-static modeling. So I would like you to post any questions on this my YouTube upload, and I would like to thank you all for listening to my presentation, and I would like to answer your questions as per my capability, and if I don't know, I will read something more, and hopefully I'll be able to all of your questions. Thank you. See you again. Bye.